Rachel wrapped her arms around James and hugged him tightly. "I love you too, James. And I promise to always stand by your side, just like you have stood by mine." They sat there in silence for a while, basking in the warmth of their love for each other. And as they looked out the window at the line of expensive cars parked outside, they both knew that none of it mattered as long as they had each other. As the night drew to a close, Rachel and James said their goodbyes to their guests and retired to their bedroom. As they lay in bed, Rachel whispered, "James, I know we have faced many challenges in our relationship, but I wouldn't have it any other way. I am so grateful for you and the love we share." James smiled and replied, "Me too, Rachel. And I promise to always be there for you, no matter what comes our way." As they drifted off to sleep, hand in hand, they both knew that they had found something special, a love that was worth more than any amount of money or any line of expensive cars. They had found each other, and that was all that mattered. Rachel and James woke up the next morning, feeling more in love than ever before. They got dressed and headed out for a morning walk, hand in hand. As they walked through the neighborhood, they smiled at each other and exchanged knowing glances. As they turned a corner, they saw a group of children playing in the street. One of the children had dropped their ball, and it had rolled into a nearby gutter. The children looked crestfallen, not knowing how to retrieve it. Without hesitation, Rachel and James walked over to the children and asked what was wrong. When they learned about the lost ball, James knelt down and retrieved it from the gutter, handing it back to the grateful children. As they continued on their walk, Rachel turned to James and said, "That's what I love about you, James. You're always willing to help others, no matter how small the gesture." James smiled and replied, "It's the least we can do, Rachel. We have so much to be grateful for, and it's important to give back whenever we can." And with that, they continued on their walk, hand in hand, knowing that their love was worth more than any amount of wealth or material possessions. They had found something truly special in each other, and they would cherish it for the rest of their lives. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice shaking. James looked up at her with determination in his eyes. "We'll fight this," he said. "I won't let them take everything away from us." And so began a long and difficult battle for James and Rachel. They spent countless hours with lawyers and in court, fighting to clear James's name and protect their business. There were many times when they wanted to give up, when the stress and pressure felt like too much to bear. But they held on to each other and to the love that had brought them together in the first place. Finally, after months of legal battles, James and Rachel emerged victorious. The charges against James were dropped and their business was saved. As they celebrated their victory, Rachel looked at James with pride and admiration. "You did it," she said. "You never gave up, even when things seemed impossible." James smiled at her. "I had to fight for what I love," he said. "And that's you, Rachel. You and our life together." Rachel felt a surge of love and gratitude for the man who had stood by her through thick and thin. She knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together with love as their anchor. Rachel sat on the couch next to James, her hand in his, and looked out the window. It was a beautiful day outside, but she couldn't help feeling a sense of unease. She turned to James and said, "I can't shake this feeling that something's not right." James squeezed her hand and said, "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. You know that." Rachel nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling of foreboding that lingered in the back of her mind. She couldn't help but think about all the challenges they had faced together over the years, the financial struggles, the disapproval of her family, and the constant pressure from society to conform to a certain image. Just as Rachel was lost in her thoughts, there was a knock on the door. She got up to answer it, but James stood up as well, sensing her unease. When she opened the door, she saw a man in a suit standing there. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Ms. Rachel Smith?" the man asked. "Yes, that's me," Rachel replied. "I'm from the Internal Revenue Service. We need to talk to you and your husband about some discrepancies on your tax returns." Rachel's heart sank. She had always been careful about her taxes, but now she realized that they must have made a mistake somewhere. She turned to James, and he nodded in support. "Thank you for letting us know," James said to the man. "We'll cooperate fully." As the man left, Rachel turned to James and said, "What are we going to do?" "We'll figure it out," James replied, holding her close. "We've been through worse before." But as the days passed, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that they were in over their heads. She was constantly worried about what the IRS would find and how it would affect their lives. She couldn't focus on her work, and she found herself snapping at James over small things. One day, James sat her down and said, "Rachel, we need to talk. I know you're worried, but we can't let this consume us. We'll do whatever it takes to make things right, but we can't let it affect our relationship." Rachel felt tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm just so scared." "I know," James said, wiping away her tears. "But we'll get through this. We always have." And they did. They hired a good accountant and worked with the IRS to resolve the issue. It was a stressful time, but they faced it together with love as their anchor. In the end, they emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. Years later, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Rachel turned to James and said, "Remember when we thought we were in trouble with the IRS? That seems like such a small thing now." James laughed. "I know. But at the time, it felt like the end of the world." Rachel felt a surge of love and gratitude for the man who had stood by her through thick and thin. She knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together with love as their anchor. And that was the greatest treasure of all. As they sat together on the couch, Rachel looked over at James and said, "I never thought I would find someone like you. Someone who loves me for who I am, not for what I have or what I can offer." James took her hand and replied, "I feel the same way, Rachel. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me. I don't care about the cars or the money as long as I have you by my side." Rachel smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. "I remember the day you told me about your job, James. I was so worried that you would be intimidated by my wealth and status, but you proved me wrong. You have always been there for me, no matter what." James leaned in and kissed her forehead. "Rachel, you are worth more to me than any amount of money or any fancy car. You are the love of my life, and I will always cherish you." They sat down and caught up on old times, reminiscing about their shared experiences and the journey that had brought them to where they were today. Rachel felt the same connection she had always felt with James, and she knew that her feelings for him had never faded. James confessed that he had always regretted not pursuing a relationship with Rachel when he had the chance. He had been scared of the risks involved and had convinced himself that it was better to stick with what was safe and familiar. But now, James knew that he couldn't deny his feelings any longer. He told Rachel that he loved her and that he wanted to be with her, no matter what the consequences might be. Rachel was overjoyed to hear James's words. She had been waiting for so long for him to come back into her life, and now it seemed that her patience had finally paid off. Together, Rachel and James started a new chapter in their lives. They were committed to each other and to building a life together, filled with love, trust, and mutual support. As they drove away from Rachel's old house in James's expensive car, they looked back at the place where they had first met. They both knew that their journey had been filled with unexpected twists and turns, but they were grateful for every moment that had brought them to where they were now. As they drove off into the sunset, Rachel knew that she had finally found the happiness she had been searching for. And as for the line of expensive cars that had once parked outside her house, they were nothing compared to the true treasure she had found in James's love. Over time, Rachel and James built a life filled with love and happiness. They faced challenges and obstacles, but they always worked through them together. Despite their different backgrounds, they had so much in common, and they were able to learn from each other and grow together. James introduced Rachel to the world of luxury and glamour, but Rachel helped James to see the beauty in simplicity and appreciate the little things in life. Their love was not just based on material possessions or external appearances, but on a deep connection that transcended all of that. They valued each other for who they were on the inside, and that was what truly mattered. As they grew older together, Rachel and James started a family of their own, filled with love and laughter. They were grateful for every moment they spent together and for the memories they created. And as they looked back on their journey, they realized that everything had happened for a reason. The line of expensive cars that had once parked outside Rachel's house had been a reminder of the stark differences between their two worlds, but it had also brought them together in a way they never could have imagined. Rachel and James knew that they were lucky to have found each other and that their love was a rare and precious thing. They treasured it above all else and made sure to nurture it every day. In the end, it was not the expensive cars or the luxurious lifestyle that had mattered to Rachel. It was the love of a good man who had stood by her through thick and thin. And for that, she was grateful every day of her life. As Rachel and James sat on the couch in their cozy living room, they reminisced about their journey together. "You know, Rachel, when I first saw you, I never imagined that we would end up together," James said, taking her hand in his. Rachel smiled. "I know, me neither. I thought you were just another rich guy who was out of my league." James chuckled. "Well, I definitely had my share of fancy cars and designer clothes back then. But I quickly realized that those things meant nothing without someone to share them with." Rachel muttered, "It's funny how things work out. I never would have thought that a guy like you would fall for a girl like me." James looked at her with love in his eyes. "You're more than just a girl to me, Rachel. You're my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. And I wouldn't want it any other way." Rachel's heart swelled with love and gratitude. But just as they were about to share a tender moment, their peaceful evening was interrupted by a loud knocking on the door. Rachel got up to answer it and was surprised to find a man she didn't recognize standing on their doorstep. "Can I help you?" she asked, feeling a sense of unease. The man looked at her with a stern expression. "I'm looking for James," he said. James stood up from the couch and joined Rachel at the door. "What do you want?" he asked the man. The man pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to James. "You've been served," he said, before turning and walking away. James looked at the paper in shock. It was a lawsuit from one of his business partners, claiming that James had cheated him out of money. Rachel could feel the tension in the air as James read through the legal documents. She knew how much his business meant to him, and the thought of losing it was devastating. It was a bright and sunny day in the small town of Millfield. As usual, the town was abuzz with activity. People were going about their daily routines, and cars were driving up and down the streets. However, there was something unusual happening on one particular street. A line of expensive cars was parked outside a small, dilapidated house. The neighbors were curious and gathered around to see what was going on. The owner of the house was a young girl named Rachel. She had lived there her whole life, in the same house that her parents had left her before they passed away. Rachel was used to living a simple life, with barely enough money to make ends meet. She worked hard at a local diner to pay the bills and take care of her younger brother Max. Rachel was bewildered by the sight of the expensive cars parked outside her house. She couldn't imagine who would be visiting her, let alone in such grand style. As she stepped outside, a tall, well-dressed man approached her. He introduced himself as James, the CEO of a large investment firm. Rachel was surprised to hear that James had come to visit her, but she was even more surprised when he offered her a job at his firm. James explained that he had been impressed by Rachel's hard work and determination, and he wanted her to join his team as an analyst. Rachel was overwhelmed by the offer. She had never dreamed of working at a place like that, let alone being offered a job there. But Rachel was also skeptical. She couldn't understand why James was offering her such an incredible opportunity. She had never met him before, and she had no idea why he would be interested in her. James saw the doubt in Rachel's eyes and understood her hesitation. He explained that he had been watching her for some time, and he believed that she had the potential to be a great asset to his firm. He was willing to take a chance on her and give her the opportunity to prove herself. Rachel was hesitant at first, but she eventually decided to take the job. She knew it would be a challenge, but she was excited by the prospect of learning and growing in her career. As Rachel started working at the firm, she quickly realized that James had been right about her potential. She was a natural at analyzing data and making sound investment decisions. She worked hard and proved herself to be a valuable member of the team. But as Rachel's career took off, she found that her relationship with James was becoming more complicated. She couldn't help but be drawn to him, with his confidence and intelligence. She was intrigued by his interest in her and the way he seemed to understand her on a deeper level. As Rachel and James spent more time together, they developed a strong connection. They had long conversations about their hopes and dreams, and they found that they had a lot in common. They both wanted to make a positive impact on the world and believed that they could do it together. But there was one major obstacle standing in their way. James was already in a committed relationship with another woman, and he couldn't see himself leaving her for Rachel. Rachel was heartbroken by the realization that James would never be able to give her the kind of relationship she wanted. She had fallen in love with him, but she knew that it was impossible to be with him. Despite the pain of her unrequited love, Rachel continued to work hard at the firm. She knew that her job was her ticket to a better life, and she was determined to make the most of it. Years went by, and Rachel continued to excel at her job. She was promoted several times and became one of the top executives at the firm. She had achieved everything she had ever dreamed of, except for one thing, the love of her life. Rachel had never been able to forget about James, and the pain of their unrequited love lingered in her heart. One day, Rachel received an unexpected phone call from James. He explained that he had ended his previous relationship and wanted to see her again. Rachel was shocked but also hopeful that they could finally be together. They arranged to meet at a small cafe in town, and Rachel was filled with nervous anticipation. As she waited for James to arrive, she couldn't help but think about all the missed opportunities and what could have been. When James finally walked through the door, Rachel's heart skipped a beat. He was still as handsome and charming as ever, and she couldn't deny the strong feelings she had for him.